The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her rifle scope for the third time. The elite sniper unit had gathered to witness what their commanding officer called an impossible demonstration. None of them believed what they were about to see. Maria had arrived at Fort Braxton 3 days earlier, carrying credentials that made even the most seasoned snipers raise their eyebrows. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and a service record that read like something from a movie. But credentials meant nothing here. This was where the best came to prove they belonged among the absolute elite. The unit's leader, Master Sergeant Thompson, stood with his arms crossed, watching Maria set up her equipment. He had seen dozens of so-called expert marksmen come through these gates, all claiming they could make shots that defied physics. Most left within a week, humbled and defeated. "Santos!" Thompson called out, his voice carrying across the range. "You sure you want to attempt this? The record distance for this particular shot is 2,847 meters. That was set by our best shooter after months of practice." Maria looked up from her rifle, a slight smile playing on her lips. "Sir, with respect, I'm not here to break records. I'm here to show you something different." The other snipers exchanged glances. Confidence was one thing, but this seemed like arrogance. Corporal Jensen, who held the current range record, shook his head. "Lady, I've been shooting for 15 years. Some shots just can't be made, no matter how good you think you are." The target they were discussing sat nearly 3 kilometers away, positioned on a hillside that required shooters to account for wind, elevation, temperature, and a dozen other variables. It wasn't just the distance that made it challenging. It was the specific angle and the environmental conditions that changed throughout the day. Maria finished her setup and stood, brushing dust from her knees. "Gentlemen, I understand your skepticism, but before we begin, I need you to understand something. I'm not just going to hit that target, I'm going to hit it in a way that will change how you think about long-distance shooting." Thompson frowned. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "I mean, I'm going to make this shot without looking through my scope during the actual fire. I'm going to calculate everything beforehand, set my position, and then fire based purely on my calculations and environmental reading." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if nature itself was stunned by her words. Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran sniper with 12 years of experience, laughed out loud. "That's not shooting. That's guessing. You might as well close your eyes and pray." "Actually," Maria replied calmly, "that's exactly what I'm going to do. Well, not pray, but I won't be looking through the scope when I pull the trigger." Thompson stepped forward, his expression serious. "Santos, I don't know what kind of unit you came from, but this isn't a place for showboating. We're professionals here, not circus performers." Maria nodded respectfully. "Sir, I understand your concern, but I'm asking for the chance to demonstrate a technique that could revolutionize how we approach long-distance engagements in combat situations." The Master Sergeant studied her face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. He found none. There was something in her eyes, not arrogance, but absolute certainty. It was the look of someone who had done something impossible so many times that it had become routine. "All right, Santos, you get 1 shot, but understand this. When you miss, and you will miss, you'll be on the next transport out of here. We don't have time for people who think military precision is some kind of game." Maria nodded. "Understood, sir. But I'd like to request that everyone position themselves where they can observe both my firing position and the target impact zone simultaneously." "Why?" Jensen asked suspiciously. "Because when this shot hits, you're going to want to verify that I didn't look through my scope. Some things are so extraordinary that they require multiple witnesses." The snipers spread out across the observation area, some using binoculars, others setting up spotting scopes. Thompson remained close to Maria's position, his own scope trained on the distant target. Maria began her preparation ritual, something that looked more like a scientific experiment than military training. She pulled out a small weather station, taking readings of temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and wind speed at multiple elevations. She made notes in a small notebook, her handwriting precise and methodical. "What are you writing?" Thompson asked, genuinely curious despite his skepticism. "Environmental constants and variables," Maria replied without looking up. "Wind patterns, temperature gradients, even the Coriolis effect at this distance and latitude. Most snipers account for these things intuitively or with basic calculations. I'm mapping them mathematically." She spent the next 30 minutes taking measurements, making calculations, and adjusting her rifle's position incrementally. The other snipers watched with growing fascination. Even if her shooting claim was impossible, her preparation was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. "The wind is going to shift in approximately 12 minutes, Maria announced suddenly. "There's a pressure system moving in from the northwest that will create a brief window of optimal conditions." Rodriguez checked his own wind meter and frowned. The readings showed steady conditions with no signs of change. "How can you possibly know that?" he asked. Maria pointed to a line of trees nearly a mile away. "Watch the tree line. See how the leaves are moving in that section compared to the others? There's a pressure differential building. Combined with the temperature readings I'm getting, basic meteorology tells us the wind pattern will shift." True to her prediction, 11 minutes later, the wind indicators across the range began showing different readings. The steady crosswind they had been experiencing suddenly calmed to almost nothing. "Now," Maria said simply. She settled into her firing position, her eye coming to the scope. For nearly 2 minutes, she remained motionless, breathing steadily, making microscopic adjustments to her rifle's position. Then, in one fluid motion, she lifted her head away from the scope entirely. Thompson's eyes widened. "Santos, what are you doing?" "Making the shot, sir," she replied calmly, her hands still in perfect position on the rifle. Without looking through her scope, without any way to see her target except as a tiny speck in the distance, Maria controlled her breathing, waited for the natural pause between heartbeats, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the training ground, and every pair of eyes immediately shifted to the distant target. The spotters with high-powered scopes focused intently, waiting for the bullet's arrival. 3 seconds later, Thompson's voice broke the silence. Jesus Christ, she actually hit it. But Maria wasn't finished. She was already adjusting her rifle's position, making new calculations in her notebook. "That was the warm-up shot," she said matter-of-factly. "Now I'm going to show you the real demonstration." The snipers stared at her in disbelief. The shot they had just witnessed was already beyond anything they thought possible, and she was calling it practice. "What do you mean, real demonstration?" Thompson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria looked up from her calculations, that same quiet confidence in her eyes. "Sir, I'm going to make the same shot again, but this time I'm going to call exactly where on the target I'll hit before I fire." She pointed to the distant target, invisible to the naked eye at nearly 3 kilometers away. Upper left quadrant, approximately 2 inches from the center ring, and just like before, I won't be looking through my scope when I pull the trigger. The training ground fell silent again, but this time the silence carried a different weight. These weren't just skeptical soldiers anymore. They were witnesses to something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the limits of human capability. Rodriguez shook his head slowly. "Lady, if you can do what you just said you can do, you're not human." Maria smiled for the first time that day. "Sergeant, I'm very human, but I've learned to push human capabilities beyond what most people think possible." She returned to her calculations, the scratch of her pencil on paper the only sound on the range. Thompson found himself studying her with new eyes. This wasn't showboating or arrogance. This was someone operating on a completely different level, using methods and techniques that none of them had ever encountered. "Where did you learn to shoot like this?" he asked quietly. Maria paused in her writing. Sir, that's a story for another time. Right now, I need to focus on demonstrating why your unit needs to learn these techniques. Our unit? Yes, sir. Because in 18 months, you're going to face situations where conventional sniping methods won't be enough, where the targets will be at distances and under conditions that require this level of precision. Thompson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. How could you possibly know that? Maria's expression became serious, almost somber. Because I've already been there, sir, and I've seen what happens when our best snipers encounter enemies who have learned to operate beyond our current tactical limitations. The implications of her words hung in the air as she returned to her preparations. Whatever was coming next wasn't just going to be another impressive shot. It was going to be a glimpse into a future of warfare that none of them had imagined. Maria completed her second set of calculations and set down her pencil. The numbers in her notebook looked more like advanced physics equations than anything the other snipers had ever seen. Wind vectors, bullet drop compensations, atmospheric pressure adjustments, all calculated to a precision that seemed impossible for battlefield conditions. Upper left quadrant, 2 inches from center, she repeated, her voice carrying clearly across the observation area. I want everyone to verify the target location before I fire. Thompson raised his spotting scope and focused on the distant target. Through the powerful lens, he could see the standard military target clearly, a series of concentric circles with scoring rings. The center bullseye was barely the size of a dinner plate at this distance. Target confirmed, he announced. Upper left quadrant would be approximately the 7-ring area. Other snipers called out their confirmations. Everyone was now watching both Maria's position and the target zone simultaneously. The impossible had already happened once. She had hit a target at nearly 3 kilometers without looking through her scope. Now she was claiming she could do it again and call her shot with pinpoint accuracy. Jensen wiped sweat from his forehead, despite the cool morning air. This is impossible. Even if she gets lucky and hits somewhere near the target, the odds of hitting a specific quadrant— Quiet, Thompson ordered. Something in his gut told him they were about to witness something that would change everything they thought they knew about their profession. Maria settled into her firing position again, this time spending even longer on her breathing and mental preparation. The wind had shifted slightly since her first shot, and she made minute adjustments to her rifle's positioning. For the record, she called out without lifting her head from her firing stance, I'm accounting for a 3-degree temperature change, a slight increase in humidity, and a wind shift of approximately 4 degrees northwest. The bullet will follow a slightly different trajectory than my first shot. Rodriguez checked his instruments frantically. The environmental changes she described were so subtle that his equipment was barely registering them, yet she was incorporating them into her calculations with mathematical precision. How is she reading conditions that precisely? He whispered to Jensen. Before anyone could respond, Maria lifted her head completely away from her scope, just as she had done before. Her hands remained in perfect position, her breathing controlled and steady. Firing now, she announced calmly. The second shot rang out across the training ground, and once again, every eye turned toward the distant target. The few seconds it took for the bullet to travel seemed like hours. Thompson's voice cracked slightly when he announced the result. Upper left quadrant, approximately 2 inches from center, exact position called. The silence that followed was different from before. The first shot had been stunning, but it could potentially be explained as an incredible stroke of luck. This second shot eliminated any possibility of chance. This was skill operating at a level that redefined what human beings were capable of achieving. Corporal Jensen slowly lowered his binoculars, his face pale. That's not possible. The variables alone— wind, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, even the Earth's rotation at this distance. There are too many factors to calculate that precisely. Maria finally stood up from her firing position. her expression calm and professional. "Corporal, you're absolutely right. There are too many variables to calculate using conventional methods." "Then how?" Thompson demanded. Maria shouldered her rifle and turned to face the assembled snipers. "Gentlemen, what you just witnessed isn't magic, and it isn't some kind of supernatural ability. It's the application of advanced mathematical modeling, environmental physics, and mental training techniques that allow human beings to process and integrate far more information than we typically believe possible." She gestured toward her notebook filled with calculations. "Every environmental factor you mentioned can be measured, quantified, and incorporated into predictive models. The key is learning to gather and process that information quickly and accurately under pressure." Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, his voice skeptical but respectful. "Even if you could measure everything perfectly, actually making the shot without looking through your scope, that's pure muscle memory and spatial awareness beyond anything I've ever seen." "You're right," Maria agreed. "But muscle memory can be trained to extraordinary levels of precision. Spatial awareness can be developed through specific mental exercises. The human brain is capable of far more than we typically ask of it." Thompson was studying her with intense curiosity. "Where did you learn these techniques? This isn't standard military training." Maria's expression became more guarded. "Sir, I spent 2 years working with a classified research program that was developing advanced training methods for special operations snipers. The program was discontinued, but the techniques—" She gestured toward the target. "The techniques work." "Discontinued why?" Jensen asked suspiciously. "Because the military leadership decided that developing individual soldiers to this level of capability was less cost-effective than developing better equipment and technology." Thompson frowned. "But you said we're going to need these skills in 18 months. What makes you so certain?" Maria was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "Sir, there are enemy forces developing countermeasures to our current sniping capabilities. Electronic jamming systems, advanced camouflage, environmental manipulation techniques, situations where all our high-tech equipment becomes useless." "And you've encountered these situations?" "Yes, sir. In places that officially don't exist, against enemies who aren't supposed to have those capabilities." The implications hung heavy in the air. Black operations, classified missions, enemies with technology that intelligence agencies insisted didn't exist. Maria was describing a level of warfare that was beyond anything most of them had imagined. Rodriguez spoke up again. "Even if everything you're saying is true, what you just did, that's not something you can teach to an entire unit. That level of skill has to take years to develop." Maria smiled for the second time that day. "Actually, Sergeant, with the right training methods, a qualified sniper can learn these techniques in approximately 6 weeks. 6 weeks? Jensen laughed. "Lady, I've been training for 15 years to get where I am, and I can't even understand how you did what you just did. That's because you've been training with methods designed to develop conventional sniping skills. What I'm talking about is neuroplasticity training, advanced sensory development, and mathematical modeling techniques that most people have never heard of." Thompson stepped closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Santos, are you saying you can teach my entire unit to make shots like what we just witnessed?" "I'm saying I can teach your unit to operate at levels of precision that will make them effective in situations where conventional sniping fails. The specific techniques will vary based on individual capabilities and mission requirements." "And you're willing to do this?" Maria's expression became deadly serious. "Sir, I'm not just willing. I'm here because teaching these techniques to elite units like yours isn't optional anymore. It's necessary for mission success and soldier survival in conflicts that are already beginning." Thompson glanced toward his snipers, who were still staring at the distant target in disbelief. "What kind of conflicts?" "The kind where enemies have learned to neutralize our technological advantages. where fights happen in environments that make standard equipment unreliable, where individual skill and human capability become the determining factors in mission success. Jensen had been quietly checking and rechecking his spotting scope, as if hoping the target hits would somehow disappear. I still don't understand how you calculated all those variables so precisely. Even with perfect measurements, the computational complexity. That's part of the training, Maria explained. Human beings can be taught to process and integrate complex mathematical relationships intuitively. It's similar to how experienced pilots can feel aircraft performance problems before instruments detect them, but applied to ballistic physics and environmental factors. Rodriguez nodded slowly, beginning to understand. You're talking about developing instinct and intuition to levels that rival computer calculations. Exactly, because in real combat situations, you don't always have time for computers or reliable equipment or ideal conditions. Sometimes you have one shot, under impossible circumstances, with lives depending on your ability to perform beyond normal human limitations. Thompson made a decision that would change his unit forever. Santos, I want to see a full demonstration of your training methods. If you can really teach these techniques, we need to start immediately. Sir, the full training program requires approximately 12 hours per day for 6 weeks, and it will push your snipers beyond anything they've experienced before. Some of them may not be capable of reaching the required skill levels. What percentage typically succeed? Maria considered the question carefully. In optimal circumstances, with motivated personnel and adequate resources, approximately 60% reach functional proficiency. 30% achieve advanced capability. 10%, she gestured toward the target again. 10% can do what you just witnessed. Thompson looked at his assembled snipers, 12 of the best marksmen in the military, each one already operating at the top of their profession. The idea that only 6 or 7 of them might successfully complete this advanced training was sobering. What about failure rates? What happens to personnel who can't adapt to these methods? They return to conventional sniping with slightly enhanced skills and a better understanding of environmental factors. No one gets worse at shooting through this training. Jensen stepped forward. I want to try. I don't know if I believe everything you're saying, but what I just saw, if there's a chance I could learn to shoot like that, I have to take it. One by one, the other snipers voiced their agreement. They had witnessed something that challenged their understanding of what was possible, and despite their skepticism, none of them wanted to miss the opportunity to push their own capabilities to new levels. Thompson nodded. All right, Santos, you have 6 weeks and full access to whatever resources you need. But understand this, at the end of that training period, I want to see results that justify the time and effort we're investing. Maria's expression became even more serious. Sir, at the end of 6 weeks, your unit will be capable of operations that currently exist only in classified files, but I need you to understand something important. What's that? Once your snipers learn these techniques, once they understand what human beings are really capable of achieving, they're going to start asking questions about why this training isn't standard, why these capabilities are kept classified, and why soldiers are allowed to die in situations where these skills could save lives. Thompson considered her words carefully. And what do I tell them when they ask those questions? You tell them the truth, sir. That some capabilities are considered too dangerous to widespread knowledge, and that power, even the power to save lives, always comes with responsibility. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the training ground. What had begun as a simple marksmanship demonstration had evolved into something far more significant. These snipers were about to embark on training that would fundamentally change their understanding of human potential and their role in modern warfare. 6 weeks later, the same training ground looked dramatically different. What had once been a standard military shooting range was now equipped with sophisticated environmental monitoring stations, mathematical calculation boards, and training apparatus that resembled something between a science laboratory and a meditation center. Master Sergeant Thompson stood watching his snipers complete their final training assessment. The transformation had been remarkable, but not in the way he had expected. Only 8 of his 12 original snipers had successfully adapted to Maria's training methods. 2 had requested transfer to other units, unable to handle the mental demands of the program. 2 others had suffered psychological stress from attempting to process information at levels their minds couldn't accommodate. But the 8 who remained had become something extraordinary. Sergeant Rodriguez was currently demonstrating a technique Maria called environmental integration. Without using any instruments, he was accurately predicting wind patterns, temperature changes, and barometric shifts up to 30 minutes in advance. His shooting accuracy had improved by over 40%, and more importantly, his consistency under varying conditions was now nearly perfect. Corporal Jensen had surprised everyone, including himself. He had not only mastered the advanced calculation methods, but had begun developing his own variations of Maria's techniques. His ability to make precision shots without scope assistance had reached levels that approached Maria's demonstration from 6 weeks earlier. The other successful trainees each showed different strengths. Some excelled at the mathematical modeling aspects, others at the intuitive environmental reading, and a few demonstrated exceptional spatial awareness that allowed them to maintain accuracy even when firing from unconventional positions. "Assessment complete," Maria announced as the last trainee finished his shooting sequence. "Results are ready for review." Thompson gathered the unit in the briefing area they had constructed specifically for this training program. The walls were covered with charts, formulas, and environmental data that would have looked like advanced physics research to any outside observer. "Gentlemen," Thompson began, 6 weeks ago, most of us thought what Sergeant Santos demonstrated was impossible. Today, 8 of you have achieved capabilities that exceed anything I thought human beings could accomplish." He gestured toward a series of targets displayed at the front of the room. "These represent shots made under various environmental conditions, at distances ranging from 2 to 4 kilometers, with accuracy levels that redefine what we consider possible in military operations." Rodriguez raised his hand. "Sir, I need to ask something that's been bothering me throughout this training." "Go ahead, Sergeant." "If these techniques are this effective, if they can turn good snipers into whatever we've become, why isn't this standard training for all military snipers?" Thompson glanced at Maria, who nodded slightly. They had discussed this moment extensively over the past 6 weeks. "That's a fair question, Rodriguez, and it deserves an honest answer. The truth is that capabilities of this level change the strategic balance of modern warfare. Individual soldiers who can operate at these precision levels become force multipliers that some military leaders consider destabilizing." Jensen frowned. "Destabilizing how?" Maria stepped forward. "When individual soldiers can consistently make shots that were previously considered impossible, it changes how conflicts are fought. It reduces the importance of expensive equipment and large unit deployments. Small teams of highly trained individuals can accomplish missions that previously required significant resources." "And that's a bad thing?" another sniper asked. Thompson answered this time. "It depends on your perspective. From a military effectiveness standpoint, it's excellent. From a political and economic standpoint, it threatens established systems of defense spending and strategic planning." The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. These soldiers had just spent 6 weeks developing capabilities that made them individually more effective than small military units, and they were learning that their government had deliberately chosen not to provide this training to protect institutional interests. "There's another factor," Maria continued. "Soldiers trained to these levels begin to question other limitations they've been told are absolute. They start pushing boundaries in other areas of their military service. This level of individual capability can create leadership challenges. Rodriguez's expression had grown serious. Are you saying we're going to be considered problems because we've learned to shoot better than anyone thought possible? I'm saying you're going to be given missions that require these capabilities, and you're going to discover that many of the limitations you've accepted throughout your military careers aren't as absolute as you were told. Thompson decided it was time to reveal the real reason for this training program. Gentlemen, 3 months ago, intelligence agencies identified enemy forces using tactics and equipment that make our conventional sniping methods ineffective. We're facing adversaries who have learned to neutralize our technological advantages. What kind of tactics? Jensen asked. Maria pulled out a classified briefing folder that she had kept secured throughout their training period. Electronic jamming systems that disable scope computers and range-finding equipment, advanced camouflage that defeats thermal and infrared detection, environmental manipulation techniques that create false wind and temperature readings for our instruments. She opened the folder and displayed photographs that showed the aftermath of failed military operations. 6 months ago, a sniper team was deployed against targets using these countermeasures. The mission failed because our snipers couldn't function effectively when their equipment was compromised. The photographs were sobering. Equipment destroyed by precise enemy fire, positions compromised despite being considered perfectly concealed. Mission objectives left incomplete because snipers couldn't adapt when their technological support systems failed. The techniques you've learned over the past 6 weeks are designed to make you effective in exactly these situations, Thompson explained. When your equipment fails, when environmental conditions are artificially manipulated, when you face enemies who have learned to neutralize conventional military advantages. One of the quieter trainees spoke up. Sir, are we going to be deployed against these enemy forces? Thompson and Maria exchanged glances again. This was the moment they had been building toward throughout the entire training program. Yes, Thompson answered simply. In approximately 2 weeks, this unit will be deployed on a classified mission against targets using advanced countermeasures. Your new capabilities won't just be useful. They'll be essential for mission success and your survival. The room fell completely silent. These soldiers had just learned that their extraordinary training wasn't theoretical preparation for future conflicts. It was immediate preparation for a real mission that conventional military methods couldn't accomplish. Rodriguez was the first to speak. What's the target? Maria pulled out additional photographs showing a remote facility surrounded by mountainous terrain. Enemy research installation developing the countermeasures I described. Intelligence indicates they're preparing to distribute this technology to hostile forces worldwide. And conventional forces can't handle this? Conventional forces have been tried. 3 previous attempts have failed because the enemy's defensive capabilities neutralize standard military equipment and tactics. Jensen studied the photographs carefully. What makes you think we can succeed where others have failed? Because, Maria replied, the enemy's countermeasures are designed to defeat soldiers who depend on technology. They're not designed to defeat human beings operating at the level of capability you've achieved. Thompson stood and addressed the entire unit. Gentlemen, you volunteered for this training not knowing its ultimate purpose. Now you know. You've developed capabilities that make you uniquely qualified for a mission that could significantly impact global security. He paused to look at each soldier individually. I need to know if you're prepared to use your new skills in actual combat against enemies specifically trained to defeat conventional military forces. One by one, each trained sniper confirmed their readiness. They had spent 6 weeks pushing themselves beyond what they thought possible. And the idea of facing enemies who could neutralize conventional forces was more exciting than frightening. Maria made one final announcement. There's something else you need to understand. After this mission, regardless of its outcome, you'll be offered the choice to join a specialized unit that handles similar operations or return to conventional military service with your enhanced capabilities. What kind of specialized unit? Rodriguez asked. The kind that officially doesn't exist, handles missions that aren't acknowledged, and operates with capabilities that most of the military doesn't know are possible. Thompson smiled grimly. The kind of unit where what you've learned over the past 6 weeks is just the beginning of your training. The 8 snipers looked around at each other, realizing that their lives had just changed permanently. They had volunteered for what they thought was advanced marksmanship training and discovered they were being recruited for a level of military service that existed in the shadows of official operations. Mission briefing begins tomorrow at 600, Thompson announced. Equipment preparation starts immediately after. Deployment is in 14 days. As the unit dispersed to prepare for their new reality, Maria gathered her training materials and notes. She had successfully transformed 8 conventional snipers into something approaching superhuman capability, and now they were about to face the real test of their abilities. Looking out at the training ground where this had all begun, she remembered her own first mission with these enhanced capabilities. The enemies they were about to face had learned to defeat conventional forces, but they had never encountered soldiers operating at the level these 8 had achieved. The real demonstration of impossible shooting was about to begin, and this time it would be an actual combat against enemies who thought they had rendered human marksmanship obsolete. Thompson approached her as she finished packing. Think they're ready? Maria shouldered her equipment bag and looked toward the barracks where her former students were preparing for their first real mission. Sir, they're about to discover capabilities they don't even know they have yet. The training was just preparation. What comes next will show them what human beings are really capable of achieving. She started walking toward her vehicle, then turned back. And after this mission, they'll understand why these capabilities have been kept classified. Some things change the world, whether the world is ready for them or not.